Okay, then I think we shall get started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on what time zone you currently are. We are the committee that is focusing on diversity and inclusion, and the purpose of today's presentation is about showing you the results related to the survey we did a few months ago, and for which we collected the data and treated them. Before we actually start, I'd like to thank Neil Reed to make sure that we all can carry on with the NARSC meeting online. Is definitely some additional work for him and the local committee member to make that happen. So we are very, very thankful. And also special thanks to all the committee members of this group. You're looking at Daoshin Tong, Yuri Mansouri, Neil Reed, Carlian Patrick, Michael Delgado, Sarah Lowe, Yilan Shu, Eleni Bardaka, and Alessandra Fajan has been kind enough to be here in order to act as a moderator. In other words, if you have any questions, comments along the lines of this presentation, please write them in a chat, and Alessandra is going to compile those questions and we're going to answer them at the end of today's presentation. So let me give some insights with respect to what has happened with respect to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee here. So the timeline is the one you see here on the top. Discussions related to those two questions of diversity and inclusion started in summer 2019. Some of you may recall that we had the European Regional Science Association meeting in my country, in France, that summer. It turned out I was on the board meeting of RSAI, and then the questions related to diversity and inclusion started to rise. But the data that were collected at that time were not necessarily sufficient to draw any conclusion. So following that, I started to ask around who would be interested in looking into those issues from a very scientific point of view. And Neil was kind enough at the NARSC meeting in November of 2019 to invite us for breakfast and simply say, you know, it's an important issue for the association. We all will hate to see that some members decide to not come anymore to meetings because they don't feel well integrated or well represented. So let's all work on it. So based on that, basically the groups that you saw here started to build up and to think about a survey to be sent to all the NARSC community members. We were able to reach out to 318 respondents. So you can see that the survey and the data collected is extremely representative of the NARSC communities that we are. And since September, we have basically been analyzing those data in order to provide you today with the results using different techniques. Some are qualitative and some are actually based on econometrics. Today is the first time we present those results. We don't necessarily want to stop here. We would like to share them as widely as possible. I think they're going to be the subject of a small white paper because we really would like to make sure that we become a little bit more proactive in this field with respect to diversity and inclusion. And the conversation is going to carry on for quite a long time because we feel based on those results, there are some efforts we can work on. And hopefully we have means to assess whether the changes we might implement have been working or not. So I also want to make sure what those guiding principles are. It's definitely not a witch hunt we are interested in, not at all. We see ourselves as a group that is here trying to advise what kind of changes could be implemented in a community. And we definitely want to use a very scientific data-driven approach. It's quite important because we feel that everybody should be aware of where those data come from so that if they want to participate into this movement, they can actually feel free to replicate our result, offer new perspective, and simply help in a process. That would be great. We feel it's a long-term effort and it's going to require a little bit of effort from everyone. It's not just our group here that we feel is interested in those issues. And definitely we are very interested in making sure that it's not a committee which is exclusive. It's quite the opposite. We will be very interested in bringing new people into this committee to get the ball rolling. So now I'm going to show you some of the results here that were basically based on the survey that was built. Gillian?
All right, I'm Eli Shi from the University of Illinois. Now I'm going to go through some basic analysis of the composition of the survey respondents. Just as a reminder, for this survey, we received 318 respondents. Okay, so the first thing we look at is the gender composition. So from the pie chart on the left, you can see that female make up almost 70% of the survey respondents. And we are very mindful of the representativeness of the sample. So we go ahead to do some exercise by comparing the composition of the survey respondents to the NARSC conference registration in the past 2 years. In the survey, we actually ask people to self-identify their gender, but in the registration, this information is not available. So it actually requires a little bit of work. So there's a task force of this committee that basically went through the entire registration list and label people who we know one by one. And then after that, we characterize the gender of names that have very obvious gender identity. And then for the remaining ones, especially the ones in foreign names, we actually use their name and their affiliation and then do some Google search. Most of the time, this exercise will lead us to their personal website or their LinkedIn page where we can easily find a picture and then visually identify whether this is a female or male. So then at the end of the day, what we found out is that our survey is actually very representative of the conference attendees. You can see that in 2018, regardless of a bigger sample, there are 32% female conference attendees. In 2019, somehow for some reason it's the same percentage. And this is very similar to what we have in the survey. So based on this, we have some confidence that at least from the gender dimension, our survey respondents are very representative of, usual participants in NARSC conferences. And then the next thing we look at is the age composition, which is on the right. Clockwise, the pie slides on the chart are organized in such a way that their percentage goes from the biggest to the smallest. So you can see that the biggest age group is this age of 35 to 44. It makes more than a quarter of the entire sample. And then the next two biggest groups are the age 45 to 54 and the age 26 to 34. They are, each of them are about 20% of the sample. And the next one is the age 55 to 64, slightly smaller than 20%. And then we also have about 13% that's age 65 and above. All right, Sandy, you can go to the next one. Okay, so now, so then the next question we ask them, questions we ask them are about race and ethnicity. It's interesting to ask this question when you are facing an international audience. So we found that some people do not quite resonate with these two questions, and we actually allowed them to opt out, and by saying that they are not in the North America region. So you can see that at the end of the day, we have smaller samples for these two questions. When we ask about race composition, well, when we ask about race, only 203 respondents answered this question by giving our specific race. When we asked about ethnicity, even even smaller sample answered the questions. So if we look at the left, whites make up 67% of the sample. And the next biggest group is Asian, which is 17% of the sample. And then we have about 8% who are African American. And then we have some smaller groups identified. And then on the right, when we look at ethnicity, we can see that the vast majority, almost 70%, are not Hispanic, and only about 14% identify themselves as Hispanic or Latino. And then we have a small share that did not provide information, provided that they do not identify themselves as outside of North America. Now, based on these two questions, we also want to get some idea about the representativeness of our survey. But it's not a trivial, it's actually impossible to identify a person's race and ethnicity based on their names or even based by look. Right. So what we can do is actually based on survey respondents' answers to these two questions, we know their country of origin. We know actually based on the first question, 36% of them identify themselves as outside of US and Canada, the North America region. Based on the second question, 41% of them identify themselves as outside of North America. So then we again go back to the conference registration the past 2 years. Based on their email, if they use their working email account, it would be pretty straightforward to identify their affiliation and also directly from their affiliation. So, and then the remaining uncertain ones, we then again use Google to find them. And then at the end of the day, we find out that in 2018, the conference attendees, among the conference attendees, 35% are outside of the US and Canada, North American region. And then in last year, this percentage is 41%. So you can see that again, from the dimension of country of origin, our survey is also very representative of usual, NARSC conference attendees. All right, Sandy, you can go to the next one. All right, so the next exercise we do is to look at people's field of specialty. From this figure, you can see that economics is the major field that people are specialized in, almost 45%. And then the next biggest is geography and applied or econ. Each of them are about 10, 11%. And then the next one is planning, followed by public policy. And we also have about 3% coming from engineering. And the remaining one, you can see lots of small, colorful, thin pie slices. And that basically says that we have many smaller fields, and this survey sample is very diverse in terms of their field of specialty. All right, Sandy, you can go to the next one. All right, and then the last thing I believe we look at for the composition analysis is to look at their rank. We call it rank for simplicity, but really it's like the career development stage or even like the type of employment. So you can see almost 30% of the sample are full professors, followed by almost 20% of associate professors. And then assistant professor and graduate students make up about 12% each. And then we have about 7% government employees. And then about another 7% who are retirees and 4.4% of postdocs. And then again, you see those very thin pie slices. These will include like people who are working in the extension, people who are working in international organizations, and so on and so forth. All right, so I think that's it for my part.
Okay, so now we're moving on to the quantitative analysis. Mike?
Yeah, hi everybody. Michael Delgado here from Purdue University. So the first exercise we wanted to do is sort of a conditional descriptive statistic. So if you look at the top panel of this table, we can see on the left-hand side, we've broken down faculty rank. So thinking back to that pie chart that we saw just a minute ago, this would be subsetting those individuals who have stated that they're an assistant, associate, or full professor. And then for those categories, we've separated by female, male, gender. And so on the far right column there, you can see the share female. And so what we can see is that it's basically 50-50 for assistant professors. We can see that the share female drops quite a bit to 25% and then to 21% as you increase in rank to associate and then full professor. Looking at the bottom panel, we did the same exercise by age. And so you can see that there are very few respondents age 25 or under, so that sample is very small. We do see 75% female for that group. When we move up to the other age categories, also as we saw in the pie chart, we see a lot more respondents there. So we see again about 50% female in the age 26 to 34 category. And then that share is slowly declining as age increases. So we move all the way to 15% in the age 65 or older category. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we ran a series of regressions. So let me just take a minute to introduce for you the basic specification because by and large, the regression specification is going to be the same across most of the regressions that we show for you in the next several slides. So you'll see at the top of each table, you'll see the dependent variable is listed there. So in this particular one, we have the number of keynote presentations given in regional science conferences in the last 10 years in North America. And then we have a list of the covariates there on the first column on the left. So what we've done in these tables is we've indicated where we have a dummy variable or a set of dummy variables. We've indicated what the reference group is in parentheses. So at the top there, you'll see that our first reference group is female. So naturally, there's no estimate associated there. And then we have the estimate next to male. And then that interpretation would be relative to the female category and so on as we move down. Because we have so few individuals reporting an age of the 25 category, we've combined the age below 25 and then 25 to 34 into a single category. So that becomes our reference group. And then we have the non-academic as a reference group. And so we have faculty and student. Student there would actually also include postdoc, for example. And then we have various departments as a reference group. So if you remember to the pie chart, we had the largest departments were economics, geography, and ag economics. And then we ended up with quite a few small slivers. And so those sort of combined together to form a reference group. And again, that's the reason we have to combine those into a reference group is to avoid multicollinearity of having too many dummy variables that would only represent one or two or a small handful of individuals. And then lastly, you can see at the bottom on the left, we have a residence in Asia and Africa as a reference group. Again, those were combined together because of a small sample issue, particularly for Africa, but Africa and Asia were both the smallest sample groups, so those were combined together. And then the last comment that I wanted to make, as you'll notice here, we don't have indicators for race and ethnicity, and that goes back to the discussion that we had just a moment ago, where we had quite a few individuals opted out of that and indicated not a resident in North America. So for many of these regressions, we're using the full sample, and so we didn't have an indicator for race or ethnicity for the full sample because a lot of individuals had opted out. So that's why you don't see those appearing here. Okay, so that's sort of the setup. And I should mention, I guess, that these are all estimated using ordinary least squares for consistency. Okay, So if we look here again, for this particular regression, the dependent variable is the number of keynote presentations in regional science in North America in the last 10 years. And so what we find that gender and age, faculty, academic status, and academic department, we do not find are significant correlates. You'll see a star there on the far right column, and also listed in this box on the right of the slide, the variables that are statistically significant. So for this model, we have the number of awards in North America is positively and significantly related to the number of keynote presentations. And so these are the number of awards in regional science in North America in the last 10 years. The number of non-regional science editorial boards on which the individual is currently serving. And then at the bottom, we see residents in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next slide, please. Okay, so the regression is basically the same setup here. So I'll just discuss the results for you. So the dependent variable at the top is the number of papers published. This is actually the number of peer-reviewed papers published or book chapters in the last 10 years. And so we have a few more variables are significant relative to the reference group for age. We find that the age 35 to 44, 45 to 54, and you'll also notice a dot next to age 65 or older. So that dot indicates significance at a 10% level. So we see that these three age categories are positive and significant. We find that faculty status relative to student or non-academic is strongly significant. We see that the Department of Economics is negative and significant at a 10% level. The number of editorial boards on which the individual is currently serving is positive and significant. And that's the number of regional science editorial boards. And we also see the number of non-regional science editorial boards is again significant. And then finally, the number of regional science meetings in North America attended in the last 10 years is positive and significant. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the dependent variable for this model is the number of awards in regional science in North America in the last 10 years. And the variables that are significant in this model, we see that being in an ag economics department is negative and significantly related to the number of awards. Again, we see that the number of non-regional science editorial boards is positively and significantly related. And the number of regional science meetings in North America attended in the last 10 years is positive and significantly related to the number of awards. Next slide, please. Okay, and then Eleni will discuss these results for you.
Hi everyone, I'm Eleni Baraka, assistant professor at North Carolina State University. So now we're switching to discussing some of the qualitative results that we received. So there was one question in the survey that said, what do you think is the biggest diversity challenge currently faced by NARSC? So the qualitative responses were coded, and then we ran some econometric models. And in this slide, you will see results about the inclusion of women. So the dependent variable is about individuals who mentioned the inclusion of women as one of the challenges, diversity challenges faced by NARSC. And the set of independent variables is similar to what you've seen in the previous slides. So here, what we find with respect to inclusion of women is a negative association with the respondent being male, and a positive association with the number of regional science meetings in North America. Next slide, please. And then, as Michael mentioned, we are also showing results in some cases with the restricted North America sample when it makes sense, when we find significant results on the race variables. So here we see the results of the North America only sample, and we see that being Hispanic is also positively associated with mentioning that inclusion of women is a diversity challenge for NARSC. Next slide, please. And then we dive a little deeper into these regressions, and we switch our reference group from female to male here. And you see that, so we have female as one of the indicator variables, and then we have the interaction of being female and having attended basically many regional science meetings in North America. So we have that interaction of female and number of regional science meetings attended. And what we find is that that is the significant variable here that explains, that is basically the only statistically significant variable in this model. So being a female and having attended many regional science meetings in North America is positively associated with mentioning in that qualitative response that inclusion of women is a diversity challenge for NARSC. And next slide, please. And then we take this one step further, and we're looking also at the North America only sample to look for any associations related to race. And we also find that in addition to being female and having attended meetings in North America, also being Hispanic is positively related with mentioning the inclusion of women as an issue for NARSC. And then the next slides, I think, is Carly-Ann.
Hi, I'm Carly-Ann Patrick. I'm at Georgia State University. And I'm going to talk about a few additional quantitative results with the outcome variable being whether or not young scholars or minorities were listed as a diversity challenge by the respondent. And in the first set, we're looking at whether or not inclusion of young scholars was listed as a challenge by the respondent. And in general, it was only the Department of Geography and residing in North America that had a positive correlation with seeing inclusion of young scholars as a challenge. Next slide, please. And when it came to inclusion of minorities, the two things that seemed to be positively correlated with seeing inclusion of minorities as a challenge were the number of meetings that regional science meetings that the respondent had attended in North America, and also residing in North America. Next slide, please. So again, we only had race and ethnicity responses for those who were in North America. So coming back to just the North American sample, it is the number of regional science meetings and Hispanic ethnicity, or self-identifying as Hispanic ethnicity, that seems to be most correlated with nothing else really showing up. Next slide. So we did want to dig a little bit more into the issue of those who responded saying that inclusion of women was a challenge for NARSC, in particular because one of the few things that showed up in those results was that men were much less likely to say that women were, or inclusion of women was an issue. So we wanted to see if there were any variables in that could help us understand those men who did say that inclusion of women was an issue, which turned out to be about 12% of the sample. And in a regression on the full sample, we get some marginally significant information where you're slightly more likely to say that inclusion of women was an issue and be a man if the number of publications you had were higher, or the number of board meetings you attended would actually reduce it. But next slide. But when we restrict the sample to just the men, and so the dependent variable here is whether or not inclusion of women in NARSC is an issue or a challenge for NARSC, then the only thing that really shows up for us is that men who publish more are more likely to say that this is an issue for NARSC to at least consider. That's it. Next slide.
Okay, and then, so we decided, if you recall, in that survey to also ask the respondent what their views were with respect to some of the actual problem and some of the solutions. So this is a point I want to touch upon here. And you will see that the results are to some extent an echo of all the nice work that you just saw here using econometrics. So if you recall, in a survey, one of the questions that we asked the respondent to tell us more about was what is, in their view, the biggest diversity challenge that NARSC is facing today. We got roughly 50% of people answering this question, assuming that the others found that there was not necessarily a diversity challenge. But amongst those who answered, and you will see that the answers are ranked by size, most of the answers were dealing with questions of minority. The second was dealing with questions of environment. As I will indicate a bit further, some people feel that eventually some of the meetings will see people who have been attending those meetings kind of gather together. So if you are brand new to the association, you may find it a little bit difficult to feel accepted or to be invited out for lunch or for dinner. The lack of women in the field, as has been highlighted before, and the lack of youngsters. Some people spoke about the discipline or the focus, the kind of questions that we focus on into the different presentations that we have, as well as a challenge with respect to the composition of the board of our association, or the board of the journals, or the awards. And some folks also felt that maybe there is a bit of an issue with respect to representation across the different geographical areas from the world, quite often driven by the cost of flying from a faraway place. And there was also a bit of feedback with respect to the fact that maybe we ought to do a little bit better with respect to professional development and preparing students, postdocs, and even young professors towards the careers that they have ahead of them. We also looked at those questions with respect to categories of respondents, and you will see that there is a great correlation between who is answering and the kind of diversity challenge they have met. For instance, female respondents felt that the biggest problem was related to the presence of women in association. They also indicated that the lack of minority was an issue in their view. For male respondents, the issue was mostly related to the lack of minority, and they also felt that eventually the environment could be somewhat improved to make them feel more welcome. For people who qualify or see themselves as minority, obviously the challenges associated to being minority in a group is the most important in their eyes, as well as some questions related to the environment during those meetings. We also gave people the chance to help us finding solutions, because I remind you, at the end of the day, the entire point of this exercise is to simply collectively find a way to make the association more welcoming, where everybody will feel very comfortable and is willing to be part of it for the next 50 years. So here are some of the answers that they were bringing. I want to remind you that only roughly half of the people answered that particular question. And there is a very high correlation between those who said there was a challenge and offered a solution. So we find pretty much the same categories as what we've seen earlier. The first one amongst those solutions that were offered by the respondents is dealing with the environment in an association. Better interaction between all the members and outreach to eventually groups which are less represented in a field, including more the youngster and the minority, issues related to composition of the board and awards, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that more women get access to those boards, receive awards, questions related to also the topics, as I indicated earlier, geographical areas. I already indicated that earlier. Some found that eventually they will be happy to be coming more regularly if some of the costs associated to attending were to be lowered. We are not speaking necessarily about the registration fees, but the entire cost of attending, which includes the flights and hotel. Some of the proposed solutions, most of the women indicated that the solution should be to make sure that there is a little bit more diversity in the positions of leadership, both for the journals in our field, as well as in terms of receiving awards and even as a composition of the board. Neil reminded me on this point that the board is actually fairly well composed of men and women, but maybe the way it is perceived is a little bit different from reality. One more element we need to discuss. Also, women indicated they want to see obviously more women in those positions and some of their younger colleagues. Male, we're focusing once again on questions of the environment when attending meetings, and offered that we try to reach out a little bit more to sub-represented groups, which I'm going to discuss in just a minute. For the minority respondent, the environment was an issue. They feel that there are just too few people who can represent who they are. They don't necessarily feel well accepted as a result. So indeed, increasing visibility of minority in the field is very important to their eyes. So as we decided to go a little bit deeper into some of the suggested solutions, because some people were really vocal about what they'd like to see, and that was actually very useful feedback. And that's also what we would like to hear from the audience of today. And further, as we spread out the results of this work to our community here, a little bit more of outreach to female, minority, and youngsters. So there was quite some recognition that the problem is not entirely in our hands. In other words, everybody recognizes that if you look at the composition of graduate programs across US universities and even elsewhere, there are simply not necessarily enough women and minority people. So obviously, it's a little bit hard to later on see a huge presence as they move on to being member of our association, or as they move on to being part of our community. But at the same time, very clearly, there are some great efforts the community can do here in terms of nomination to awards, in terms of leadership position to the board, whether it's a journal board or the board of the association. So in other words, in my view, a very well explicit and accurate, I would say, representation of solutions we can act upon right now, and solutions we're going to have to work on and will take a much longer time, which basically are in the hands of all of us trying to reach out more to young PhD students as they are entering our programs. There was a desire also to increase transparency with respect to the way those awards are actually selected. Some felt that eventually a small group of people were deciding who will get those awards. It was not necessarily clear. In some cases, they will be going to people who eventually attend one of our meetings and we do not see them anymore. So a little bit more transparency was suggested in those survey results. Eventually creating some awards or fellowships that will be specifically devoted to people who have done their best to improve diversity in our community. Some suggested that potentially some of the reason why the minority groups are not necessarily as well represented as we wish is because some of the research that we focus on is not specifically to minority groups. So they just feel that it's something that we ought to be addressing in the years to come. Some people indicating, as I said earlier, that the fact that obviously the North American meeting is always in North America make it a little bit hard for them to attend it if they are themselves students from Europe or students from Africa or Asia. The cost is obviously not small. And it's part of some of the elements that we've been thinking about as a group, that eventually having once in a while a session that will be fully online, allowing students, participants from a faraway place to still be part of the meeting without being physically with us is something that we may want to think about. And I still want to indicate clearly that we also had several people who indicated it's a wonderful community. That, you know, I just don't want to make sure that, I want to make sure that you don't get the impression that we only got negative comments. Some felt that it was a very engaging community compared to the other professional associations they belong to, and just felt indeed that there are still changes to work on, but overall they were satisfied with it. So what's next? I think that's really the point that we need to emphasize, for which I would love the audience today to give some feedback, because as indicated earlier, it's really a collective effort. We'd like to make sure that we try to all work on it, for the reason that we simply want this group to be as large as possible, to have as many people work on regional science questions. We all in this group have been very happy to be part of the group of the association, but we want to make sure that other people feel the same way and are willing to be joining us for many years to come. So what are the steps that have already taken place? So first of all, we now have one representative from this committee on a NARSC board meeting. It's Professor Yuri Mansouri. And it turned out that the board meeting of NARSC this year is exactly at the same time as right now. So we could not really have the board members listen to this talk, but it's recorded. I'm assuming that they're gonna watch it at a later stage. But someone is going to basically report to the board what is the extent of the current data and feedback that we got, and eventually offer some solutions, listen to some solutions from the board so that we can move on and address those challenges. We're gonna have another survey, maybe in a year from now, 2 years, I do not know yet. The entire committee already spent quite some time to reach the level you're looking at today. So I don't think we're gonna do that new survey tomorrow. But of course, in the long run, if we want to improve things, we're going to have to be checking on a somewhat regular basis whether that feeling of inclusion and diversity is going in the right direction. From you today, from the people who are listening to this talk, I would love to make sure that we hear from your ideas, suggestions. As indicated so many times, it's really a collective effort. We are very welcoming any ideas that you may have. We are going to draft a report showing all those results, and hopefully it's going to be widely distributed in our community so that everyone can participate and share their opinion. So that, yeah, definitely we're going to use what is being suggested to simply improve on the current situation starting in the spring. This effort is in coordination with a group that Carl-Jan is part of, the NARSC Young Scholar Committee. Is going to very much benefit from what we decide to do with respect to diversity and inclusion, and the other way around. Obviously, Diversity and Inclusion Committee will also benefit very much from recommendations that Carl-Jan's group is going to be thinking about. This discussion also of diversity and inclusion is something that has been raised with other regional science associations. An example of them is a Western Regional Science Association meeting, which is taking place every year in February. So the current director of the group, Jiwan Lim, happens to have had, is a good friend of mine, he happens to have had long conversation with me, and we've already suggested a few things. So whatever action we are going to build on for WRSA, hopefully will also be of some use at the NARSC level at the level of the other subnational association, and who knows, even in the other regional science association around the world. We're looking at elements which are going to try to promote professional development, interaction between the youngsters and the more advanced scholars in the field, and so on. And that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. I really want to thank everybody in this group. They all worked really hard to make sure that we can reach the level we have today. I'm very thankful to also all the respondents, without whom there is no way we could have had enough data and any econometric work done. So with that, I'm going to leave it to it. I think that Alessandra may be telling us what kind of feedback or question we may have from the audience. Feel free that you indicate your ideas in a chat, and why don't we all look at where we are at with respect to that. So Alessandra?
Yes, so I was looking at the chat. There's only a comment by Martin Smith, which I can allow to speak in a second. But can I just abuse my position while the other people maybe, gather the courage to say something? Maybe if I start, then more people will follow. Because I had a lot of thought about this topic as you were talking. First of all, I think it's great what you've done. Congratulations, because it's a good example. And you did say that about the replicability. It's a very good example that can be replicated in other contexts. I also have to tell you that now I'm vice president of the Italian Economics Association. We just did exactly the same thing on a questionnaire on gender and diversity. I wish we actually had known about each other doing it. Maybe, we could have coordinated, make the questionnaire even more similar, but I will let you know when we have the results, because it's obviously something that it's felt everywhere. So ERSA would be the same thing.
So the Economics Association, the American Economic Association, has gone through this kind of review too. I do not recall if they have used an actual survey, used econometric work to actually display results. It's also happening for the American Agricultural Economics Association. But again, I do not know of another example that has actually used econometric techniques to try to demonstrate what are some of the sources of the issues.
And so we also have in the Italian Economics Association now a gender and diversity committee. And well, I didn't want to chair that committee, although they asked me, because I always think it's a good idea if a man chairs a committee like that, because we are not saying this is a women and diversity committee, it's a gender and diversity committee. So it's something that it's not only a women issue. And in fact, one of the things that I notice in all these meetings is that the number of attendees who are not female is not very many. Normally, when you go to whatever meeting on this topic and you look at the composition of the audience, not the panel, because normally, if people want to work on this, there are also, of course, men that want to work on this. You are an example, but Michael would be another one. So normally the people that do the work, there is a good gender balance, but the attendees, look around, you will notice that the majority of them are women. So we tend to actually talk to each other, the minorities that talk to each other, and this is not good. And I have no solution for how we could expand this. But also I wanted to I'm gonna type in the chat a couple of websites that I think you might have seen, but maybe not all the attendees have seen them. This is the issue of the newsletter in 2009, where Brigitta Walder, who is actually here, Brigitta, I can see her in the attendees, went through the whole list of the editorial boards and looked at the percentage of women that were actually in editorial boards. And I did the same in the same issue. I was looking at the attendees at conferences. So one thing that I want to say is that if you look at it in kind of more dynamic term, the attendees seems to be a little bit more now. So we have gone somehow, some way into this direction. But unfortunately, if you look at this other report, which is a 2017 report by Simona Iammarino and Paola Prenzel, so an Italian and a German regional scientist. And they actually look at what Brigitte did in 2009 for 2017 for editorial board. You will see that there have been really not much of an improvement in terms of this topical position that you talk about. And you actually, there is an in-group bias even in recognizing the problem, right? You did say that, you highlighted it very well, the whole of your group highlighted it very well, that women are saying that the inclusion of women is a problem. And then if you look at men, they don't say that this is an issue. It doesn't come out as if being part of an editorial board is a problem. I think it is more of a problem to be part of journal editorial boards than it is to get an award. And in fact, again, if you look at these two reports, even in 2009, the number of female academics who were getting awards was actually quite high. In some awards, even 40%. But the editorial boards were really where we hit a glass ceiling. So it's not just a matter of being there. We are increasing, but this glass ceiling is incredibly tough to actually, go over.
So let me respond quickly, and I really would like to invite everyone from the committee to share their views. So I think that's actually raised the importance to do the kind of work we've done here on a fairly regular basis. Basically, the status right now in the association is what we have described. It will be quite wise to do a survey again, say in a year and a half, to see how things have changed. From a white male perspective, so someone will say, why is he concerned by that? My true motivation is that I will feel it's a pity to see that the number of attendees to our meeting is going down because people feel not well represented or treated unfairly. And then you have a very good point. It's also quite difficult to many to feel, oh, okay, I feel this way because actually they don't see themselves in those shoes, right? I'm having similar conversation now in the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for my college, where people from minorities say, this is what happened to me. It's true, I have a hard time relating to it, but we have to trust that their experience has not been appropriate, therefore we have to address it.
Sorry, Sandy, one last question. Did you ask in your questionnaire, in your survey, the respondent whether they were themselves part of an editorial board? Yeah,
so people, indeed, we asked them how many editorial board you belong to, which is in either regional science or non-regional science journals. And yes, they had to list how many of those boards they would be part of.
Because I've noticed that in all your dependent variable, there wasn't one that was being part of an editorial board. So I was just wondering if it's worth maybe running a simple logic on being either an editor or part of an editorial board as a function of gender, minority, all the individual characteristics of these people.
So let's refer to Carlian, Eleni, and Michael to see, have you guys eventually thought of it, or it's in your project? What do you think?
I'll let Michael check and see if that's one of the ones because we actually had a lot of results we didn't present just for time reasons. But while he's checking that, I will say one of the things that came up several times as a significant predictor of seeing things as challenges, whether it be women or minorities, was inclusion on non-regional science and editorial boards. So we kind of thought that was interesting because clearly if you're on a non-regional science editorial board, you're bringing in these perspectives from other disciplines and can sort of contrast. And then of course, these are not causal, but that was highly correlated with saying that some of the things that we were concerned about were things that we should be concerned about as opposed to not. And I'll let Michael tell you if we actually ran the one you were interested in.
Yeah, I was just checking the list. We did not run that one, but we can do that. So I'd be happy to run that, and we can, if this moves to the white paper, then we can add it there maybe.
And Carlian, when you say member of a non-regional science editorial board, I think it makes a difference whether it's a mainstream economics journal or another field.
Yeah, so we actually don't know the difference in that. So the question just said, are you asked for the number of regional science editorial boards that the respondent was participant on, and the number of non-regional science. So
I think it's one of those improvements we need to think about for the next round of survey. We didn't have any example of really the kind of question to ask from anywhere. As I mentioned to you, even so other associations we belong to are interested in those issues. None of them really did see the approach and use econometric work. So your point, Alessandra, is very well taken. I think we're going to do even better in terms of how precise the questions will be and how exciting the solutions offered will be. But for version 1, draft 1,
great.
I think okay.
You are a fantastic example. And in fact, I think, you should present these more in general to other conferences. Now you're presenting it at NARSC, but you should go and present it at ERSA. You should go and present it at Presco. Next time there is one, or the next RSAI, because it's good that you present the results to your own conference, but you have to be an example so that the other people get an inspiration.
And there is such an amount of spillovers, which is obviously our bread and butter in this work, in the sense that whatever idea of which is worth it is emerging in one association can so easily be replicated elsewhere. So I'm very optimistic about what's coming next, because I really believe people have really good intention into working on those questions, and we're gonna hopefully very quickly come up with great ideas to work on it collectively. We're going to have next to evaluate whether it worked or not. So your point was well taken, that the trend is good, but there is still that ceiling. We're going to have to assess that. But we started somewhere at least.
No, I think it's great. And there are some things like, for instance, the percentage of female attendees that you find, which is about, 1/3? If you look at this article about ERSA and Europe of 2017, the percentages are very close. So no matter where you are in the world, the regional science field, the composition seems to be similar, at least. So, you are not different than the rest of the world.
Which also lead into a big problem that I feel any association is going to have issue with, which is we simply don't have on the first place enough minority and women entering even our field of interest as grad students, so to some extent. But that also shows that at the university, we need to try to reach out even earlier to junior high school and even earlier. It's basically that collective effort to bring more people into STEM fields, science, technology, focused fields. That one is a very long-term effort.
There was a comment from Martin, and he said it was just an idea for visualization, no further discussion needed. He said it would be nice if you have a population a pyramid with colors for the different ranks for female and male.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Martin. We can work on that idea. It's very nice. And actually, Martin, because you have access, I think you publish regularly that newsletter on what's happening in regional science. You're going to have at some point to remind me what your deadlines are or anything along those lines. We'll be very happy to provide you with a short, one-page article of what we're trying to do here and how we will be very happy to get more feedback from everybody.
There is another question, from Christina. Christina, do you want to, I can allow you to talk if you want to ask the question yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just wondering if there's some sort of idea to have kind of a mentorship program or assigning kind of a buddy to have lunch with, things along those lines. So I'm from Ohio State, and so we have a pretty large group at NARSC every year. And so part of the reason that I probably didn't find that it was super hard to walk into NARSC was I was walking in with like 7 or 8 of my classmates. And so definitely for people who kind of don't have that community already there, I think it would be great to have some sort of like buddy system or something. I mean, even for people who do have that large network coming in, to meet somebody new or something along those lines?
So Christina, your point is extremely good. It turned out that this is one of the ideas we can steal from the American Ag Econ Association. And it turned out that I have benefited from it myself. One of my students attended that meeting 2 years ago, and it was matched with a guy very famous who knows way more than I do on questions of crop insurance programs in the US. It turned out that student and I were working on crop insurance. So that student found a way, I don't really know the detail, but he found a way to end up having lunch with that guy. And as a result, we were able to bring some of his feedback into the paper. So indirectly, I benefited a lot from this kind of process. You're absolutely right, Christina. I think one of the issues we will see in this field, in our field, but also in other conferences, is that if you belong to a fairly large group, you're going to kind of stick to your group during the conference, which is a pity because you already know everybody from your own department. If you come and you're kind of the only one from your university coming to those meetings, you're going to feel a little bit rejected because you see everybody else going for lunch or dinner among themselves, and they don't necessarily invite you because they simply don't know you. So your point is very well taken. We need to find a way to make sure that at least at one time during a meeting, a junior person who has expressed a desire to get to know someone is going to make that connection on a basis which is a little bit more than just a 2-minute conversation during the coffee break. I think that, Mike, you had looked a little bit into that, right? Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So as Sandy said, the Ag Economics Association has a pretty good mentorship program. They've been able to use that pretty successfully for at least a few years. I have actually spoken with the people who run that, and so I sort of have we can sort of build on their blueprint, I think, pretty easily. You know, I think they have a pretty good system. They kind of help pair people up. There's nothing that's binding, but they really just sort of give guidelines to say, you know, it'd be great if you overlap, you know, at a conference once or maybe twice a year. You know, as Sandy said, you know, you get to meet somebody. Maybe it's to sit down for lunch. Maybe it's, you know, at some point during the conference, but it's also a name and an email address that, you know, perhaps, you know, somewhat periodically over the year, that's somebody that you can talk to. And they have, it's pretty flexible. So the junior professionals can basically give a little bit of information of what they might be looking for. So, you know, for example, you know, females could say, you know, I'd like to be paired with somebody who's a, you know, senior female in the profession. And so you can have that kind of mentorship, and or it could be with somebody in the same field. And so they have a pretty good system. We kind of borrowed from that. And I think that's something that we had talked about amongst ourselves as something that we might be able to propose that we do within regional science.
And just to follow up on that, that's also been a discussion in the Young Scholars Committee. But there was a very, it's been a big part of this discussion as well, because the two obviously overlap. Having been a participant in the Women in Real Estate Networks and some of the other discipline economics mentorship programs that work like the Ag Econ Association, I think it can be really beneficial to have that sort of setup, and I think we can replicate it. To speak more specifically though to what happens at the conferences, we had also talked about replicating what REN does with regards to sort of a conference pairing for the beginning of the cocktail hour that they do with a senior and mid-career level and junior, like a 3-way pairing for just the beginning of the cocktail hour, which I think, I remember my first NARSC, and it was overwhelming walking into that giant cocktail room, and also being from Ohio State, I had backup. So I think your point's well taken.
Thank you, Christina, for your comment. It's very true. We have to work on that. There are other points we discussed, professional development also for young professors, eventually online a session that will allow people far away to be part of it without bearing the cost of being in it. And definitely keep collecting the data on membership of the board, journals, number of awards. So we'll get there little by little. I'm very optimistic about the years to come, because I think the association is going to see a lot more people coming regularly and feel very comfortable and seeking to be attending those meetings, just like we all are willing to be away from home and stop having online Zoom-based conversation. I think we all look forward to being back in person. So. Well, unless there is any last comment from anyone, I think we're gonna simply leave it to that. I wish everybody a good conference. It's actually my first one online this year. So let's see how that will go. It will make the cocktail hour way less fun, but we'll figure out in the future how we can make that better. So thank you so much to everybody, all the committee members, Alessandra, thank you, and see you all. Goodbye.
Thank you all and well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.